A spoon trembled in silence. Why? Welcome to Faded Echoes. I am your host, Ombra. Comment below. Where are you listening from right now? Your messages make every mystery more meaningful. Let's begin. You can say a lot about life at the brownstone, but unpredictable isn't one of them. My mornings usually fall into a pattern. Wolfe is upstairs in the plant rooms with Theodore and the orchids. Fritz is in the kitchen doing battle with breakfast, and I'm at my desk pretending to file things while actually reading the paper. Routine is our religion. That's why I noticed the sound before I noticed the visitor. A spoon rattling against porcelain. Now, there's nothing unusual about spoons in our household. They clink, scrape, stir, and occasionally get criticized by Wolfe if they're improperly washed. But this one didn't sound right. It was a faint, off-key tremor that carried across the office like a violin string plucked too tight. Fritz was meticulous enough to cook with surgical precision, and Wolfe wouldn't be caught dead rattling anything metallic. So I knew it wasn't coming from either of them. The source turned out to be a woman in her 30s, standing awkwardly by Wolfe's globe, clutching a teacup she hadn't been invited to hold. Her spoon shivered against the porcelain saucer with every twitch of her fingers, and if you ask me, the sound was deliberate, as if she wanted to make sure somebody noticed. She was dressed plainly, but plain in that suspicious way that screams careful choice. Light gray dress, neat gloves, and a hat that had been worn once too often. She wasn't the sort of client that money dripped off of, but desperation? That was practically stitched into her hemline. She didn't flinch when I asked who had let her in. She just said, "Your door was unlocked." Which, for the record, it hadn't been. I told her Wolfe would be down in exactly 19 minutes, allowing for his orchid ritual and the elevator ride, and that she might as well sit down before the spoon drove me to homicide. She did, and she kept her gloves on. Always a sign. When Wolfe finally descended, he gave her the same glance he reserves for political speeches and overcooked lamb. He lowered himself into the chair behind his desk, leaned back, steepled his fingers, and waited. The office air thickened the way it always does when Wolfe is deciding whether a human being is worth the oxygen they consume. "My name is Clara Vardel," she said quickly, as if the words had been rehearsed, "and I need your help. Something has been stolen. Not money, not jewels. Something smaller." Her voice wavered, then steadied. "A silver spoon, but not just any spoon. It's the only proof I have." "Furry," Wolfe muttered. That was all. But his eyes flicked and I could tell. A stolen spoon was no lure for him, but the phrase, "the only proof I have," that had resonance. Proof of what and against whom? I figured she'd either be back on the curb in 10 minutes or sitting through one of Wolfe's fat lectures on why he doesn't accept trivialities. But Wolfe didn't dismiss her. He leaned forward, resting his elbows on the desk. "Explain," he said, in the tone that meant he had decided this disturbance might be worth his time after all. The spoon had stopped rattling. The silence around it was worse. She didn't start with the spoon. They never do. They start with the part that hurts, as if the bruise will do the explaining for them. She perched on the edge of the red leather, still gloved, and told Wolfe she was the acting director of the Vardel Arts Trust since March, that the trustees didn't trust her, that her appointment was interim, the way a fever is interim. You wait to see if the patient dies or recovers. The money was tight, the donors prickly, the musicians more talented than solvent, and last Thursday's board tea had been designed to soothe tempers and loosen wallets. The tempers had not been soothed. One wallet had nearly loosened permanently, attached, unfortunately, to a man named Jasper Millet, the treasurer, who chose the wrong moment to go pale and fall sideways like a top that had lost its spin. "He isn't dead," she said, catching my eye as if I'd already called the coroner in my head. "He's recovering." It was Digitalis. The doctors were clear Wolfe made a small, disgusted sound that could have meant either the drug or the drama. "Chronology," he said, Nouns and verbs. Spare me the adjectives. Clara nodded, reset herself, and gave it to us clean. The tea was at 4. 8 people present. Herself, Millay, Mrs. Hester Bly, public relations and picture hats. Owen Driscoll, counsel with a gift for making bad news sound reassuring. Gideon Voss, donor with an operatic voice and a pocket watch big enough to time a football game. Lila Wren, Clara's assistant, lately fond of reminding everyone she was underpaid. Carlo Fiore, who ran the Trust's cafe and thought fame came with foam on the cappuccino, and Mirabelle Kay, a mezzo-soprano between engagements who had attached herself to the Trust the way ivy attaches to brick. There was tea, there were lemon tarts, there were speeches. At 4:20, Jasper Millet's hands trembled. At 4:22, he was on the carpet. The ambulance left at 4:40. Somewhere between his first tremor and the door slamming on the medics, a spoon disappeared. "Not any spoon," she said. "My mother's set. Sterling, mid-Victorian, fluted handle with a V worked into the throat. There are 6 teaspoons. There were 6, and one had a hairline on the bowl from a fall in 2001. If you saw them every day, you'd know it from the sheen. I know it. At the tea, I laid them myself. I handed that one to Mr. Millet. After the confusion, when we cleaned the service, that spoon was gone." "Foy," Wolfe said, but the vowel had weight. "You said it is the only proof you have." "Proof of what?" "That someone meant for Mr. Millet's tea to be different from everyone else's," she said. She swallowed, and the teacup in her hand gave a polite tremor against the saucer like an actor remembering a line. "Chef Fiore swears every cup was poured from the same pot. We all ate the same food. The police, well, there aren't police, not yet. The hospital notified them. They asked questions. I told them Mr. Millet's heart wasn't perfect, which is true. But Mr. Driscoll, our counsel, suggested I not speculate. I'm not speculating. If the spoon is found and tested, if residue remains, it would show that what touched Mr. Millet's cup did not touch anyone else's. And if it turns up in the wrong hands, Miss Vardell," Wolfe said, closing his eyes briefly as if to speak to his soul about the human habit of approaching truth by spirals, "why was your mother's silver in use at a board tea?" The answer came fast and practiced. The Trust's own service was in repair. The donor, Voss, had threatened to be offended if paper cups appeared near his money. Clara, eager, anxious, reckless, take your pick, had sent Lila Wren to fetch the Vardell set from her apartment 3 blocks away. The spoons were hers to lend, hers to lay, hers to count afterward with a hand that knew each one. 6 went out, 5 came back. "Who touched the tray after the collapse?" I asked. "The ambulance men," she said. "And me. And Mr. Driscoll, who said we must present a calm face and not look disorganized. I told him to take his calm face and—" She caught herself and glanced at Wolfe. "Names," Wolfe said. "Full names and addresses where known. Roles. How each of them feels toward you and toward Mr. Millet. Motives, if you can swallow the words she gave them, and I took them down." The room had settled into Wolfe's kind of quiet, not empty, but arranged. Fritz, who had appeared just long enough to level a mournful look at the abducted cup, retreated after Wolfe said, "In 5 minutes, beer," without taking his eyes off Clara. If you think that sounds like command, you haven't heard him ask for beer when he doesn't want to be interrupted. "Now," Wolfe said, "the spoon. You say it is proof because it can preserve minute traces of a soluble glycoside, and because you alone can swear which spoon went to Mr. Millet." "Yes." "And it vanished," Wolfe said. "Where from?" "From my desk," she said, and the tremor this time wasn't the cups. "After the tea, I went straight home and wrapped the 5 in tissue. I didn't want to look at them. I kept seeing his hand. On Friday morning, I forced myself to check the set against the list I keep. There was a gap. I realized which one was missing. At noon, I told Lila. At 2, I told Mr. Driscoll. At 4, I decided to bring you the remaining 5 so you could see them. She stopped. When I opened the drawer, the bundle was untied. The 5 were there, but they'd been handled. The tissue was different. I didn't tell anyone that someone entered your apartment, I said. She shook her head. No. I live with my aunt. She's 91 and believes burglars are gentlemen. Everything was locked, but the drawer key is in my bag, I left my bag in the trust office while I went to the hospital. Wolfe opened his eyes again. If you ever want to see concentration put on like a glove, watch him then. Your assistant, Miss Wren, she was there. And Mr. Driscoll. Yes. And Mr. Voss, the donor who cannot abide paper, he was on the phone? He's always on the phone. And Mrs. Bly, who manages appearances in and out. She tried to arrange a statement while we were waiting, and the chef. Carlo was in the kitchen disinfecting everything in sight. And Miss Kay, the mezzo. She disappeared for 20 minutes and returned with lilies for Mr. Millay, which seemed operatic, Wolfe grunted. And Mr. Millay's condition. Improving. He asked for the accounts. That got me a look from Wolfe, which, translated from his language, meant that we had just moved from melodrama to human nature. Money gives motive a backbone. The doorbell rang then, 3 short pulses. I started to rise. Wolfe lifted a finger to hold me and called, "Come." I didn't like that. We don't come for strangers. The latch turned anyway. I got across the rug in time to open the door myself and block the passage. The man on the mat was thin in the expensive way, with a jaw like a folded knife and a tie that had never met a bargain. He peered over my shoulder and spotted Clara. Miss Vardell. Good. We can avoid dramatics, he remembered me, which was considerate. Mr. Goodwin, tell Mr. Wolfe I represent the trust and our directors. I advised Miss Vardell not to complicate things. Driscoll, Clara said, gathering herself up. Owen, this is... I know who he is, Driscoll said. He tried a smile on me. It didn't take. And I know what this is. Miss Vardell is distressed. It's perfectly natural to look for patterns. But the hospital will make a report. If anything improper occurred, we will deal with it internally. There is no need to involve private. Theatre. Theatre, I said, usually has better dialogue. Wolfe didn't raise his voice. He didn't have to. Mr. Driscoll, you have intruded without invitation. Remain where you are. The chair creaked as he adjusted himself a half-inch, his version of an armed cavalry charge. Miss Vardell has engaged me. I haven't, Clara started, then looked at him, then at her gloves, then nodded. Yes, I have. Good, Wolfe said. Mr. Driscoll, you may listen and you may depart, but you may not advise Miss Vardell in my house unless I solicit it. He pushed the yellow notepad an inch toward me with his fingertip. Archie, you will obtain the spoon if it exists and learn why it doesn't if it doesn't. You will begin at the trust. Names, rooms, routines, and the geography of the tea. There is a drawer and a bag and a key. I want the distances between all 3. Also, Mr. Millay's ledger appetites, Driscoll's knife jaw hardened. We won't permit. You will discover, Wolfe said, that my permitting does not consult yours. Clara finally set the cup down. The spoon on the saucer gave one last delicate shiver and was still. I took Clara as far as the stoop and left Driscoll on the wrong side of the threshold, where he could practice law on the magnolia. She had a way of thanking me that tried to turn into an apology. I told her to save it for Wolfe when there was something to thank us for. 20 minutes later, I was pushing through a glass door etched with a lyre and the words Vardell Arts Trust where ambition meets acoustics and both echo. The reception desk had a bell and a vase of lilies doing their best to own the room. The girl behind the desk looked like she'd missed lunch and blamed donors. She perked when I asked for Lila Wren, then wilted when I said I was from Nero Wolfe's office. In certain circles, our name is either a lullaby or a fire alarm. Lila came out fast, a slim brunette with the posture of someone who has lived too long under clipboards. She had a nice face that was busy. "Miss Vardell called," she said, as if that solved whether the building would tolerate me. "Mr. Driscoll also called." Her mouth twitched. "He said he'd arrive soon to make sure you didn't, his word, excavate." "Then let's make the most of the prehistory," I told her, and she actually grinned. It's a habit of mine to turn assistants into allies. The return on investment is better than the stock market. Clara's office was narrow and bright. 2 windows on the street, a desk big enough for 6 crises, and a sideboard that had pretended to be a dignified antique until someone gave it a job. Lila went straight to the bottom drawer and produced a flat key from a cup that also contained paper clips, a button, and the kind of breath mint that outlives its sponsor. She paused with the key in hand. "Miss Vardell keeps saying she shouldn't have used them," she said. "She's wrong. We needed them. Mr. Voss would have, well, he would have been Mr. Voss. Let's keep the regrets in the drawer," I said. "Open." She did. Inside was a bundle of white tissue, tied with kitchen string that had seen tomato sauce. She set it on the desk and stepped back as if there might be an aria. I untied it. 5 teaspoons lay shoulder to shoulder like a small chorus line. Sterling, fluted with the V carved where the throat begins. They were clean. They were very clean. Somebody had given them the kind of polish you used to erase yesterday. "You see?" Lila asked. "I see," I said, and I sniffed. If you think that's undignified, you've never watched a lie try to hide behind a smell. The tissue had a faint sweetness that didn't belong to soap, more like sachet. The metal had no tang of lemon or vinegar. It had the flat, too even scent of a bottled cleaner. "Who else has a key to this drawer?" "Miss Vardell," she said. "And me, because I file petty cash. When she went to the hospital, she left her bag on that chair." She pointed to a blue visitor that wouldn't have enjoyed the tea any more than Mr. Millay had. "Her aunt phones every hour on the hour. The bag sits there." Driscoll came in and out of the office that afternoon. So did Mrs. Bly. So did Mr. Voss, twice. I don't count Carlo. He sticks to the kitchen unless summoned, and Miss Kay. "She doesn't stick," Lila said. "She floats." I tied the bundle, slid it into a large manila envelope from the desk's top drawer, and wrote "to be returned" on the face, for the look of the thing. I measured the distances because Wolfe had asked for them, and because sometimes a foot of hallway explains a felony. From Clara's desk to the hook where her bag would hang. 9 paces for my legs, call it 22 feet, and a bend around a credenza that held a plant with opinions. From the hook to the office door, 6 paces. From the office door to the kitchen, a left 25 paces, and the smell of coffee doing push-ups. If someone wanted that key and had a minute alone, they could have taken it on the way to the kitchen, fiddled with the drawer, and put it back before the lilies found their water. "Show me the room," I said, and Lila took me to the boardroom where the tea had happened. It had a long table, a donor's portrait with an expression that suggested the artist owed him money, and a sideboard against the wall where the tray had sat. The sideboard had a faint, damp ring near the edge that said a pot had sweated there longer than Carlo would like. There were chairs for 10, set for 8. Space had been made for an ambulance, and you could still feel the apology. "Everyone sat where?" I asked. She pointed and named Clara at the head, Driscoll near her elbow, Mrs. Bly within striking distance of anyone's reputation, Voss with his back to the windows, Millay 2 seats down from Clara, because he liked to see the door, Miss K near him because she likes to be near whatever is happening. Lila herself nearest the sideboard. Carlo in and out. Who poured? I did, she said. Mr. Voss said. My hand shook. He thought it was endearing. He endears me to homicide. And you handed Millet the spoon with the line, I said. Yes. She looked stubborn. That is not a coincidence. In the kitchen, Carlo Fiore was wrist-deep in the kind of stainless steel that forgives no sin. He was mid-30s with a Roman nose and a patriot's love for a dishpan. He gave me a chef's once-over and decided I wouldn't reboot the walk-in. If you want statements, he said, I gave one to the hospital and I can give you the same with punctuation improved. Improve the truth instead, I told him. 1 pot? 1 pot, he said. Water just off the boil, Earl Grey in a paper sachet because Mr. Voss objects to leaves. Steeped 3 minutes. I poured into the pot, swirled, and set it on the tray. Milk, lemon, sugar, no honey because we were out. I went to get a jar. Miss K wanted it for her throat, but when I came back she said she had remembered she does not take honey. I left the honey and carried the tray in. You left the tray alone. For 30 seconds, he said, which is time enough to do anything wicked if you have rehearsed. You're a philosopher, I told him. Did anyone ask for different tea? He reached for a cloth, considered and put it down. Mrs. Bly asked if there was something gentler for Mr. Millet because of his heart. I said we had chamomile downstairs. She said not to fuss. She didn't want the optics of special treatment. Mr. Millet said he was fine. He wasn't, that added a note to the cord. I thanked Carlo and went hunting optics. Mrs. Hester Bly had a corner office with framed coverage of gala evenings and captions that probably slept under satin. She wore a hat even indoors. The hat wore her. She greeted me with the kind of smile you can buy wholesale. We're all very worried about Jasper, she said. He's difficult but essential. I have already prepared language that emphasizes resilience. We will not indulge rumors. Rumors like what? I asked. She spread her hands. That someone tried to harm him. People will say anything when they are frightened. We must be careful about brand damage. Art's philanthropy is delicate. And digitalis is brute, I said. Did you or did you not ask for special tea for Mr. Millet? Her eyes flickered. If I did, it was out of consideration. But Mr. Fiore explained there was no need. I deferred. I always defer to the experts, Mr. Goodwin. That is my genius. Put it on your card, I said, and moved. She tried to detain me with the latest donor swerve. I let it wash. In the hall, I almost collided with Gideon Voss, who was talking into a phone the size of a saucer and checking his pocket watch like he expected time to apologize. He boomed my last name as if he had hired it. Goodwin. Tell your employer to invoice me if we must have drama, but I abhor sloppiness. Jasper is a prig and a pedant, but he balances the world. If someone tried to tilt it, I will fund the untilting. Meanwhile, no press. Mrs. Bly gets hives. Did you take a call around 4:10? I asked. And again at 4:30. I take calls always, he said. The world rings and I answer. But yes, I stepped out. Twice. First to snarl, second to soothe. I saw nothing except lilies and panic. The spoons are not my affair. They are Miss Vardell's heirlooms and Miss Vardell's mistake. If we need money for better mistakes, we'll call, I told him, and peeled off before Driscoll could corner me with the policy book. He appeared at the far end of the corridor with a folder and a leer that wanted to be polite. I didn't give it a chance to grow up. I stopped by the security desk. Cameras covered the corridor and the lobby, not the boardroom. The guard, a slab named Bert, let me watch the windows between 4 and 5 on Thursday. I saw Lila pass with a tray at 3:58, jaw set. I saw Mirabelle K flit out at 4:24 and back at 4:39 with lilies and a bag from a florist 3 blocks away. closer than Clara's apartment, farther than the kitchen. I saw Driscoll do his pacing trick and Mrs. Bly do her calming circuit like a metronome. None of it proved anything. All of it felt like practice. When I got back to the brownstone with the envelope, Wolfe had moved no more than a half-inch in any direction. He accepted it like a judge accepts precedent. He untied the string himself, which is what passes for physical labor in our line, and laid the 5 spoons on the blotter, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, each given the benefit of his eyes. He didn't touch, he weighed them with the air. "They are sisters," he said, "but not quintuplets." His eyelids lowered the way a curtain does when the tenor is late. 4 have been polished with vigor by a hand that knows where to pressure. 1 has been polished with care by a hand that learned this morning. "Archie, bring me the cloth that taught it." Wolfe didn't blink while I went to the safe for the magnifier. Under the glass, the fluting on the throats looked like a topographical map of ridges and valleys. 4 of them had the soft, rounded grooves you get from years of the same hand, rubbing in the same circles with the same pressure. 1 had hair-thin scratches in straight, careful strokes that didn't respect the curves. An amateur had tried to polish a spiral as if it were a ruler. I checked the bowls for the hairline Clara had mentioned. It wasn't there. The cracked sister was the one that hadn't come home. "Good," Wolfe said when I reported. Then whoever interfered did not try to counterfeit the set. They tried to erase. Yesterday he let the magnifier sit, a little glass moon staring at silver terrain. Bring me the cloth that did this. The hands that learned will have chosen it for look, not for function, which was Wolfe for. Find the person who polished to make things look tidy. I took a cab because the air was heavy and my legs had already counted floors in the trust building. Lila had the door open before the bell could announce me. She looked like she wanted allies to fall out of the ceiling. Driscoll was in Clara's office with his folder and a face that could file an injunction against gravity. "Progress?" he asked, and tried to plant himself between me and the desk. "Astonishing," I said. "You're almost translucent when you're nervous." I let my smile walk past him and asked Lila for a look at the wastebaskets. She blinked, then shrugged like a soldier who has learned orders or their own explanation, and led me first to her bin. Receipts, a torn note that read, "Call florist," a paperclip that had died for the cause. No joy. Clara's bin had a tissue cornered with faint grey smears, but the grey was dust, not silver, and it smelled like the sachet I'd caught before. Her aunt's perfume in paper form. "Public relations next," I said, and Driscoll made a noise like a misfired gavel. "Mrs. Bly is on a call," he said. "She asked not to be interrupted." "Then she'll thank me for keeping her from being." I knocked and opened in the same motion. Hester Bly had the hat, the phone, and the smile. She kept 2, dropped 1. The office smelled faintly of lemons and a candle that had never been lit. Frames on the credenza showed donors at galas, donors at openings, donors considering whether they were generous enough. The silver frame on the end had a bright patch rubbed into its corner that didn't match the rest. "I need your wastebasket," I told her. "Mr. Goodwin," she said, making my name sound like an RSVP. "We are trying to maintain a narrative." "You're doing fine," I said, and lifted the lid. There was a square of microfiber the color of old cream and the size of a hand. It had a stitched edge, fancy, and 3 diagonal streaks across the middle where something had been rubbed too straight. It also had a faint, not unpleasant chemical flatness. I put it to my nose and got lemon with ambition. "Where'd you get this?" "It came with the frames," she said too quickly. "For dust. Our donors notice when their reflections are cloudy." "Do they notice when you polish teaspoons?" I asked. She opened her mouth and then closed it in a way that would have done any PR course proud. "Mrs. Bly, when someone collapses in a room where you've tried to control optics, the worst optic is the one that makes you look like you were rearranging evidence. What did you polish?" She reached for hauteur and got halfway. "I tidied the tray," she said, looking at the hat brim instead of me. After the ambulance, there was tea everywhere. Mr. Driscoll said we must not look disorganized. The spoons they looked stained. It was unsightly. I wiped them, that is all. If you're going to conjure wickedness out of housekeeping is wicked when it disturbs the furniture in a crime scene, I said. "Thanks for the cloth." I folded it once and slipped it into an envelope from her own stationery, to give it the comfort of home. Driscoll was in the corridor to intercept. "You will not remove." "I will," I said, "because Miss Vardell engaged us, and because if you wanted control, you should have kept your people from doing performative purity on objects that might matter." He didn't like performative purity, possibly because it sounded like his brand. He called my name in a tone meant to sound litigious. Lila, watching, gave me a look that said, whatever he was selling, she had stopped buying when she still had sense. I made one more stop in the kitchen to say hello to Carlo's dishpans. On a shelf above the sinks was a caddy with detergents and sanitizers. No silver polish. "Do you ever polish the cafe flatware?" I asked. "We use stainless," he said, offended. "It is democratic and does not need coddling." "Then who keeps silver bright around here?" "Public relations," he said promptly. "They polish the donors." He wasn't wrong. I checked security again and burned 10 minutes to see if anyone had ducked into Clara's office while she was at the hospital on Friday. The view of that corridor missed the office door by 2 yards. I sketched the blind spot on my pad for Wolfe and left with the envelope. Back on 35th Street, Fritz met me with a question in his eyebrows and coffee in his hands. I handed him the envelope and told him he could add the scent to his files. He sniffed and nodded. "Lemon without lemon," he said, which is how a cook describes a cleaner. I took the stairs 2 at a time because Wolfe respects promptness the way he respects butter. He didn't touch the cloth. Not at first. He held it by the corner and angled it to the window the way a jeweler tests promise. The diagonal streaks shone under the light like tracks in snow. He set the cloth next to the spoon with the straight scratches and let the air do the comparing. When his eyelids came down, it meant the harmony was sufficient for practical purposes. "Mrs. Bly," he said. "She admits to tidying," I told him. "Says she wiped the tray and spoons for optics." "Optics," he murmured, as if the word were a dish from a cuisine he had refused on principle. She would not know silver, but she would know shine. Did she have motive to improve Mr. Millet's chance of death or to disguise a cause after the fact? "She has motive to keep donors calm," I said. She also asked Carlo for gentler tea for Jasper, then backed off, which might be either prudence or a rehearsal for concern. "She's a professional emotive. If someone tried something, she'd be the first to make the room look as if nothing had happened." He allowed that with a flick of fingers. "The spoon that matters is not here. If it was used to deliver digitalis, then someone removed it from the boardroom or intercepted it later. Mrs. Bly's interference is not that removal. It is concealment of difference. The hand that learned this morning polished one of the 5 after Miss Vardell confided her intention to bring them to me. That requires access to the drawer or to her bag. Mr. Driscoll had both. So did Miss Wren and, if she floats, cleverly, Miss K. "Voss?" I asked. "Mr. Voss does not polish," he said dryly. "He funds menials to polish." There was a soft clink then from the tray Fritz had brought in with my coffee. It wasn't dramatic. It was a silver sound adjusting itself to gravity. Wolfe's eyes moved to it and away. "Archie, I want the florist from whom Miss K acquired lilies. The time on the receipt, the route she took, and whether honey resides behind their counter. I also want Mr. Millet's hospital to confirm whether any visitor brought him a thermos or the like." "You think she dosed him before or after?" I asked. "I think," he said, that Miss K is a singer who knows her infusions. Honey, lemon, chamomile, the stage's pharmacopoeia. I think she left the room with a pretext that could serve as procurement or disposal. I think Mrs. Bligh's cloth tells us that after the fact, a surface was made uniform because someone feared an expert eye. And Driscoll, I said. Mr. Driscoll is a man who prefers control, he said. If he thought an external eye would see too much, he might try to sanitize the view. He might also be honest and merely insufferable. Your work is to discriminate. He exhaled once, which for Wolfe is a cavalry bugle. You will take Saul. Tell him to stand where he can watch Mr. Driscoll fail to be translucent. You will go to the florist, then the hospital. If anyone has followed you today, bring me their shoes in words. I was halfway to the door when Fritz called from the dining room, not alarmed, but surprised. Mr. Goodwin, he said, did you move the salt? I turned. Fritz doesn't misplace salt. On the sideboard, the little cellar sat a quarter-inch to the left of its mark, the faint ring on the polished wood announcing the trespass. It's the kind of thing you'd mock if you haven't lived with Wolfe. I walked to it and looked. The top was crooked, receipted in haste. I twisted it loose and sniffed. It wasn't salt. It looked like it. It smelled like nothing, which is how digitalis looks when it's not doing its work. Innocent. Fritz, I said, where do you keep this? In the drawer, he said. I took it out for lunch and I put it back in the drawer. I did not put it here. Wolfe hadn't moved. He didn't need to. Someone, he said as if explaining the weather, has been in my house to see whether I own the means to recognize a powder. Archie, attend to the florist, the hospital, and the door latch on your way out. We have been sniffed. I checked the latch before I checked my hat. On the inside edge of the strike plate there was a sliver of something the color of nothing, tucked where a careful thumbnail could hide it. I teased it out with my penknife and got a curl of cellophane, smooth on one face, scuffed on the other. If you've never had the pleasure, here's the trick. You tape a whisper to the tongue of a latch, and the door closes without catching. Later you push and come in like a ghost with a calling card. I brought it to Wolfe on the blade as if it were caviar he'd regret. Pfui, he said, which covered both the method and the man who used it. Remove the residue from the plate and tell Fritz to change the order of the salts. Routine is an invitation, Saul? I asked. Presently, he said. First the florist. On the sidewalk I took a breath and got exhaust in a memory of lilies. The florist 3 blocks from the trust had a bell that jingled like coins and a clerk with hands stained green at the creases. Her tag said Linda, in case conversation needed a chaperone. When I mentioned Mirabelle K, Linda smiled like the word diva had just overtipped. Yes, Miss K had been in Thursday, late afternoon. Yes, lilies. White with a ribbon that said mend without embarrassing itself. Linda rooted in a shoebox of receipts and came up with a thermal slip kissed by the printer at 4:29 p.m. She paid cash, Linda said, and asked if we had those little honey sticks for sore throats. We keep them by the register for winter weddings. She took 3 honey sticks, I said. Any chance you sell foxglove on the side? We sell trouble by the stem, Linda said, but not that kind. She did ask whether Lily of the Valley was in, and I told her it's a spring thing. She said something about poisonous pretties and laughed, but singers are dramatic before they're anything else. Linda's hand hovered. She tied the ribbon herself. She didn't like my bow. I liked her not liking it. Did she leave in a hurry? In a line, Linda said. Not slow, not fast. She went east, then back west, like she had remembered a different exit to her life. I noticed feet. They bring money outside. A pane of the storefront showed me the street behind me, neatly framed. A man with a tweed coat and an opinion about being ordinary took a sudden interest in a bus schedule 2 doors down and then in a window of suit jackets we both knew he couldn't afford. I walked, and the schedule walked with me. If he wanted to be seen, I let him. If he wanted to be lost, I helped. 2 corners later, I put on a little stage business. Tie crooked, shoelace untied, a pivot into a hardware store, and he did the thing amateurs do. He hurried to keep me without having anywhere he needed to be. I let him get past and made a study of drill bits. When I came out, he had developed a friendship with a mail box. I turned north and called Saul Panzer. "Borrow my shadow," I told him. "He's shy and needs reassurance." Saul doesn't say, "on it." He does it and then uses verbs afterward if they're needed. I gave him the cross street and kept on to the hospital. At the admissions desk, I got a nurse who had been frightened so recently she was still annoyed about it. She recognized Jasper Millet's name and the exact number of times he had argued with therapy. "Visitors?" I asked. She ran a finger down the column. "Thursday Council, Owen Driscoll, 5:48 to 6:10. Hester Bly, 6:15 to 6:40. Mirabelle Kay, 7:12 to 7:32. Mr. Vossett, oh God, 8:40 until 9:04. He boomed, 'Did any of them bring anything?' Miss Bly brought nothing but concern," the nurse said, which was the brand's tagline. "Mr. Driscoll brought a folder and a complaint about parking. Miss Kay had a small bag from the Trust Cafe. She said chicken broth. She also asked for a spoon. We have spoons. You still have it?" "No," she said. "We have lots of spoons, mister." "Goodwin, but not that one." She took it away with a paper cup and said she would rinse it and return it. "People think hospitals have infinite cutlery. People are wrong," she considered. She was very careful about the cup. She folded the rim into itself with her thumbs before she put it in the bag. She said she didn't want to spill anything in the hall. It was precise. "Did anyone else ask for tea or special treatment?" "Mr. Driscoll asked for silence," she said. "He got as much as anyone does." I thanked her and used the hallway for a thought. If Miss Kay had a habit with cups, it could be about throats and lipstick or about residue, and if you think I was going to pick one without Wolfe, you haven't met my boss. On my way out, my phone buzzed like a considerate mosquito. Saul's voice was casual and crisp. "Your friend belongs to a firm on Pearl," he said. "Not a cop. Private license, clean record, expensive shoes. He tailed you to the florist and the hospital, then practiced vanishing in a deli. He didn't order food. Client?" "Driscoll has used that firm," Saul said. "He paid them last year to find a donor's nephew who had borrowed a Stradivarius to practice evasion. Same bookkeeper, same address. Stay with him." "Not if you want him to keep believing in himself," Saul said. "I'll watch the door he watches." I told him about the cellophane and got a noise I like from Saul that means the world continues to be predictable. Back at the brownstone, Fritz had reset the sideboard like a surgeon's tray. The salt cellars were twins again, and nobody's idea of a hint. I gave Wolfe the florist receipt, the honey, the log times, and the nurse's thumb trick with the cup. He closed his eyes and built a bridge that didn't creak. "Miss Kay removes surfaces that record," he said. "Lipstick, saliva, powder." She erased the rim of a cup and perhaps the back of a spoon because both had touched something she preferred not to share. It is not proof of guilt. It is proof of familiarity with aftermath. The honey is an accessory. It explains her pretext, not her intent. Mr. Driscoll hires watchers and leaves cellophane. He is not idle. He fears Miss Vardell's engagement of me more than he fears an incompetent police inquiry. "Because," I said. "Because I will not be satisfied with optics," he said, as if quoting a personal oath. "Archie, call Mr. Millet's nurse and ask whether the hospital pharmacy filled any prescriptions for him in the last month and, if so, whether any had been kept near his desk at the trust. Then call Saul and tell him to move his eye to Mr. Driscoll's evening. He turned a spoon a quarter-inch with one finger, not touching silver, only the air around it. After that, you will visit Miss Kay. Take Lily's if you must, but take her vanity if you can. I was dialing when Fritz reappeared, a line of worry under his hairline. The front latch now catches, he said. But I found this on the vestibule mat. He held out a small folded square of paper, the kind you tuck under a florist's ribbon. It was blank. On the fold there was a faint smear that would have been nothing to most men and was not nothing to us. It looked like the ghost of a fingerprint, as if someone had handled the card, thought better of leaving thoughts, and left touch instead. Wolfe didn't touch it. He looked at it the way an astronomer regards a smudge on glass. That, he said, is either incompetence or arrogance. Both are usable. Archie, you will have the card dusted at a reputable laboratory. Not the police. Mr. Driscoll must not be invited to preen. Saul will know a man, I said. He will, Wolfe agreed. And Archie, he opened his eyes fully and pinned me with the kind of courtesy that orders obedience. You will not be followed to Miss Kay. If your shadow resumes, mislay him. If you cannot, lead him through a sequence that will persuade him he has earned his dinner. You will not bring him to my door again. I went for my hat. The day had shifted from a conversation to a posture, the kind of lean you do when you think someone is about to push back. On the stoop, a breeze moved the leaves like somebody running a hand across a keyboard they hadn't practiced. I didn't turn to look for the Tweed. If he was there, he could admire my back. If he wasn't, I had a singer to charm and a blank card that had touched a hand that cared what we thought we knew. Saul's man with the powders worked out of a room that smelled like old envelopes and caution. He took the florist card between tweezers as if it might confess to someone more delicate and promised to ring Saul if the ghost turned into a print we could feed. I left without small talk. Vanity later. Evidence now. Mirabelle Kay lived 3 flights up a building that had stopped pretending its stairs weren't tired. She answered in a robe the color of smoke, doing lip trills that would have shamed a piccolo. When I held out a bodega, Lily that had survived the street with more dignity than most people, she smiled with her eyes before her mouth remembered. Singers learn fast. You're the charming one, she said. The one who makes yes sound like my idea. I've been accused, I said. Inside was a rectangle of clean and careful, upright piano with scores like a skyline, a music stand, a framed poster from a production of Samson that had taught a baritone humility, and a kitchen nook where a single cup had died bravely in the drying rack. She saw me see it and lifted her chin a millimeter. I brought Jasper broth, she said, beating me by a step. Hospitals never get temperature right, and the spoons taste like disinfectant. You solve both problems, I said. You also solve optics. The nurse says you folded the rim of the cup before you put it in the bag. That's either caution or craft. You noticed that, she said. You have the wrong career. It keeps lipstick off my music. It keeps me from leaving myself on things that aren't mine. You don't want a room full of critics photographing your cup. She took the lily as if it were a note she could hold. Jasper is a man who likes control. He hated that bed. He asked me about the board meeting while the IV crept. It was very him, and at the tea, I said, he liked to see the door. Did you sit nearer to him or nearer to the honey? She laughed. It was a nice laugh until you heard the little edge that reminded you it had been sharpened to get work. The honey was a pretext. My throat was fine. I wanted out of the room for a minute that had no cameras in it. You were at the trust today. You saw the blind spots are all moral. Your florist says you bought lilies at 4.29 and honey sticks for your throat. You went east, then west, which is either indecision or rehearsal. Which was it? It was remembering I'd left my scarf, she said, smooth as cream. You talked to Linda. Of course you did. She counts feet, she told me once. She also told me not to buy Lily of the Valley because it would send the wrong message. She meant it's poisonous. People say that like a fairy tale. It is, I said. And foxglove is a chapter. I watched her. Her eyes didn't flicker at the word. Her mouth did. You asked the nurse for a spoon, I added, and you said you'd bring it back. She says you took it away with the cup. Old habit? She misremembered, Mirabelle said without a beat. I rinsed it and left it in the basin. I'm not a thief. What about at the tea? I said. The tray was tidied. Spoons were polished. Was that you, or did Mrs. Bly take the stage? She made a face. Hester polishes feelings. She'd polish clouds if she could. I didn't touch the tray, Mr. Goodwin. I watched Lila pour, and I thought she was brave, and I watched Jasper because he was already a shade too pale. He was not poisoned at my hands. Put that in your notes and tell your employer I didn't argue with a negative. There's no blood to draw there. I let my eye drift as if it were bored. On the counter near the sink was a pair of little plastic sleeves, the kind honey sticks live in before they become good ideas. One was crimped empty. The other had a half-inch left and a lipstick crescent where someone had tested before deciding honey is not a room-temperature sport. Beside them lay a torn receipt from the florist and a twist of ribbon that matched the bow on the hospital lilies. In the drying rack, not hiding, not flaunting, was a spoon with a fluted throat and a V at the root. It was sister to Clara's 5. I let it sit there between us like a third opinion. That's a pretty spoon, I said. Where'd you find it? She didn't blink. Credit where due. At the Trust Cafe, she said. Carlo had it in a jar of misfits that his staff brings from home. He said, take one. My flat is sparse. I've just moved in. Ask him. I did, I said. He uses stainless. It is democratic and does not need coddling. She smiled with just her teeth. Then he misunderstands his drawers. You can look, Mr. Goodwin, but it will still be where I said. People dislike singers because we're visible, and we learn to use that. The person you should be asking about spoons is the woman who cannot bear a smudge. Mrs. Bly, yes. We had a cloth date. She tidied. She also suggested for optics gentler tea for Jasper, then deferred. Kindness that leaves no fingerprint is still a touch. Mirabelle moved to the piano and ran a hand along the black like a cat. You think I'm vain, she said. You came to take it. Here, take this. Jasper didn't like Clara. He liked her money. He thought the trust should have hired a director with louder elbows. He also thought Driscoll would keep the board from ever knowing what he moved between accounts to smooth cash flow. If you want a word, the word is bridging. Ask him. Ask Lila if she's tired of being told to print statements that emit a page. Ask Voss if he cares where his gifts sit overnight. I sing for donors. I hear more than most. That's helpful, I said. It's also decorative. Which were you when you left the room? Helpful or decorative? Hungry, she said. I hadn't eaten. I told Clara to stop lending the past to pay for the present. She blushed. You like that? Women who blush. It makes your questions feel effective. I prefer answers, I said. Like why you know there's a hairline on one spoon. Her eyes did a small, involuntary dart. Clara told me, she said quickly. She said she hated that spoon. She said it had history. She said she kept it for the story. It was neat. It didn't convince me. She shifted. Do you think I want Jasper dead? He introduces me to donors. He promises recitals. He says things like, my dear to women, as if we are different species. He does not die for me. That's passionate, I said. If it's true, it's almost useful. Find your spoon, she said. Not mine. Bring me back my book of arias and leave me out of the rest. I left her before vanity turned into a song I couldn't interrupt. On the stair, my phone ran a scale. Saul. Our Tweed friend had dinner, he said, with Driscoll. Then Driscoll took him to the trust at 9:40, went in through the side and came out again with a flash drive from security. He paid the guard. Cash. The firm's invoice will say consultation. The guard's retirement will say adjusted. Your man went home believing he had earned his keep. Did Driscoll visit Clara's office? Not on camera, Saul said. Not in the hall. That blind spot you drew could host a small wedding. I'll keep a man on Bert the guard. Your lab called me. The card has a partial, right index. Not enough to jump a database, but good enough to match if we find a hand. No whorls, 3 ridges, short scar at the delta. Your florist clerk has none. Your singer has a glove box. Add Mrs. Bly, I said. She handles cloth like a hobby. And see if Lila chews her cuticles or leaves prints pretty. He grunted approval. Back at the brownstone, Wolfe had a plate of something that required Fritz to have been in Italy briefly, and an expression that suggested the world could be acceptable if it came with fennel. I gave him Mirabelle's kitchen, her spoon that matched the family, her habit with lips and rims, and Driscoll's door after hours. She lied about the hospital spoon, he said, almost gently, as if regretful for her technique. She did not lie about the structure of the trust. Mr. Millet's authority is financial. Mr. Driscoll's is procedural. Miss Vardell's is nominal. Mrs. Bly's is atmospheric. Mr. Voss's is capital. Miss Wren's is access. He looked at me. You will return to the cafe and look for the jar of misfits. It will not exist. Miss Kay's spoon is either the one she borrowed at the hospital or the one that mattered at the tea. If she has the latter, she will not relinquish it without a scene. And if it's the former, I said, we're admiring our own paranoia. Paranoia, he said, is thrift. He tapped the blotter with one finger. The salt, the latch, the card. Mr. Driscoll moves to control the past. Someone moved in my house to test whether I could smell the present. We proceed. Tomorrow evening we will ask them all to sit down and tell me lies in sequence. Before that I require Mr. Millet's ledgers and Miss Wren's loyalty sorted. Send Saul to dine with the guard. You will dine with Miss Wren. On what? I asked. Discontent, he said. It is a nourishing stew. Bring me back a list of pages she has been told not to print and a description of who first used the word optics in her presence. He closed his eyes. The room settled like a pond after a stone. I wanted to ask him about vanity, mine and Mirabelle's, but Fritz came in with coffee and a look that said he had set the salt in 10 new places and dared the world to move any of them. I took the cup and thought about a spoon in a singer's rack, and the little blank card with a half-print that had wanted not to exist, and a lawyer who bought himself the dark. Wolfe had said tomorrow evening. That meant the orchestra was tuning. Tonight we gathered instruments. Lila Wren didn't pick the restaurant. I did. And it wasn't fancy. Just quiet, with booths deep enough for conversation and lighting that made secrets look natural. She showed up in a navy dress that had been bought for appropriate occasions and worn enough times to remember each. She slid into the booth like she'd been waiting for an invitation to breathe. You said dinner, she began, and then stopped when she saw I'd already ordered soup and wine. I should warn you, I don't drink much. That's fine, I told her. You can sip and talk. I'll do the drinking and listening. Her smile had the kind of tiredness that comes from remembering things at the wrong time. She stirred her spoon once, twice, as if keeping rhythm with a band I couldn't hear. Wolfe thinks you've been told to leave things out, I said. Statements, reports, drafts. He thinks you've been ordered to misplace pages. Her eyes widened just enough to confirm. Then she leaned forward, elbows on the table, fingers tightening around the stem of her glass. Not misplace, she whispered. Revise. Owen, Mr. Driscoll, always phrases it that way. We'll revise the draft. That means I remove any footnotes Jasper added about discrepancies in the accounts. Or I soften phrases that sound like red flags Discrepancies, I said. The polite word for holes. Yes, bridging, he calls it. Transfers between accounts, sometimes days before a gala, sometimes after. Temporary, he insists. Jasper hates it, but he doesn't stop it. He says the trust needs to look steady to donors. Mr. Voss doesn't ask for detail. He just wants to hear the balance is stable. She sipped, eyes flicking like she expected Driscoll to be in the booth behind us. I print the reports with what Owen approves, and the originals. She hesitated. You burn them? I asked. Her lips pressed tight. He takes them. Says he'll lock them away. But last week Jasper told me to save copies. He said he wanted leverage. He didn't explain. I kept them on a flash drive, and then my computer was updated. It said it was routine, but the files were gone. All of them. Do you still have the drive? She nodded. At home. But it's empty. I let her talk herself out, and when she slowed, I nudged the conversation sideways. Optics. Who used the word first? She exhaled, almost laughed. Mrs. Bly. She says it every other sentence. The optics are bad. The optics are good. We need better optics. I think she dreams in optics. She told me the morning after the tea that I should write a note for the minute saying, Mr. Millet fainted from stress, not illness. She said it was better for morale. I didn't. Clara insisted the record stay plain. That told me Clara had some steel after all, and that Hester Bly was busy sanding reality smooth. About the spoons, I said, and she flinched like I'd touched a nerve. You knew which one was cracked? Yes. Clara mentioned it the day before, while setting them out. She fussed over it. She wanted the nicest for Mr. Voss. But Jasper sat nearer the tray, so she swapped at the last second. She thought he wouldn't notice. I noticed. I notice everything. Her voice broke a little on the last word, as if the noticing had worn her down. I leaned back. Then you also noticed who touched the tray after Jasper fell. Mrs. Bly, she said immediately. And Owen. He moved the cups aside so the medics could reach Jasper. He told me not to worry about the silver. I didn't touch it again. The soup cooled, the wine glass shone, and I had the sense of a girl whose job was keeping other people's hands clean until her own turned gray. When I dropped her at her building later, I watched to make sure no tweed coats or shadow men followed her inside. Nothing. I turned back toward 35th Street and walked into the smell of Fritz's kitchen. Wolfe was in his chair, eyes half shut, but they opened when I gave him Lila's testimony. She confirms Driscoll's stewardship of appearances, he said, and Miss Bly's mania for optics. She also confirms Mr. Millet's leverage. Archie, did you note her word? Leverage. He intended to use the records as cudgel. That provides motive for Driscoll to silence him. It also provides motive for others who feared being struck. Miss Kay, perhaps, if she knew her opportunities depended on donors not learning she had a patron who doctored books. She's also sitting on a spoon, I said. One that matches Clara's set. Yes. Wolfe's lids lowered. If it is the spoon, she cannot explain it away forever. If it is not, she has chosen an unfortunate ornament. He pressed his fingers together. Tomorrow we assemble them. We will not ask about teaspoons or salt. We will ask about character and watch the spoons tremble in silence. Before I could answer, the phone rang. I took it. Saul. Our lab man matched the partial from the florist cord. Female, index ridge and scar. It matches Mrs. Bly. He dusted one of her gala invitations from a donor file. Same hand. She handled the card and didn't leave words. Good, I said. Wolfe likes silence when it has fingerprints. I passed it on. Wolfe allowed himself a grunt. Then Mrs. Bly entered my vestibule, or sent her hand to do so. She left blankness with intent. She wished me to know she was aware and yet to conceal what she knew. Foolish. Tomorrow evening will be instructive. Fritz came in then, announcing lamb with rosemary and a sauce that forgave no mistakes. Wolfe shifted a quarter-inch, his version of salivating. I sat, poured myself a glass, and thought about the line of suspects, Clara, anxious with silver, Driscoll, trimming books and hiring shadows, Bly, polishing everything until reality disappeared, Voss, booming over the noise while letting others do the math, Kay, with her honey sticks and vanities, and Millet himself, awake in a hospital bed, clutching the accounts like a miser clutching heat. The brownstone was quiet except for forks and the faint hiss of the radiator. But it wasn't the comfortable quiet we lived with. It was the kind that waits. Wolfe ate, Fritz hovered, I made notes. Tomorrow, every one of them would sit in this office, under Wolfe's eyes, and every spoon, every cloth, every empty card would have to sing the truth. I didn't kid myself. They'd come rehearsed. But I've seen rehearsals before. Wolfe doesn't need noise to win. He just needs silence that shakes. And judging by the look on his face as he savored Fritz's sauce, he was already writing the score. Morning brought the kind of quiet that means more than noise. Fritz had rearranged the salt a third time and dared gravity to disagree. Wolfe was in a mood that looks like indifference and is actually arithmetic. He told me to go look for a jar of misfit spoons that probably wouldn't exist and to bring back anything that did. At the Trust Cafe, Carlo gave me a look that said I was going to insult stainless steel if I wasn't careful. I asked him again about the jar. He walked me through the drawers like a docent. Rows of stainless, a dignified army. No strays, no sterling, nothing that needed coddling. On the back shelf, a plastic bin held bent spoons that had lost a fight with gelato. Even they were stainless. If I had seen sterling, he said, I would have sent it upstairs with an invoice for snobbery. He rubbed his forehead. Miss Kay took broth from me the night she went to the hospital. I gave her a paper spoon, compostable, eco, because we ran out. She made a face and said, hospitals make spoons out of disinfectant. I told her to ask them for silver. It was a joke. Your jokes are useful, I said. Keep making them. I found Bert at security eating an apple like a man who knew cameras were watching. He had a hangdog air that goes with a conscience on a leash. Saul had softened him. I watched the end of it. Bert admitted Driscoll had bought himself a copy of Thursday's hall footage. Not all of it, he said. Just the corridor on this floor. Said it was a legal thing. He scratched his cheek where a razor had gone on strike. He asked me to hold the backup an extra day, but the system dumps on Sunday. Cloud eats what the boss tells it. I can't stop that. Can you remember what the camera saw? I asked. He grimaced at the apple as if it had asked a rude question. Blur in a hat. Could be Miss Bly's. Could be not. Somebody went into Miss Vardell's office when she went to the hospital. It's the blind spot after the corner, you know that. Whoever it was didn't sprint. People don't when they think they belong. Came out with nothing obvious. If they took a key and used it, they put it back fast. I'm not saying crimes happened. I'm saying people behave like they do when they want me to think. Which is also behavior, I said. If a man came to your desk with cash last night, what would you do? He looked at me. Take it and tell him I'm a bad man. Then tell Saul what pockets it warmed good. Keep telling Saul. The hospital gave me a Jasper Malay who had traded pallor for petulance. He didn't thank me for the concern I didn't offer. He did ask who had told Clara to hire Wolfe. When I said Clara had, his mouth tightened like a purse. You've been bridging, I said, and he didn't jump. You call it that. Temporary loans between accounts. A donor's pledge arrives on Friday. You borrow Thursday to keep the lights pleased. Driscoll calls it optics. Lila calls it revisions. You call it necessary. He frowned at the ceiling where hospitals keep answers. If donors saw what cash flow looks like in a bad quarter, they would rewrite their wills, he said. Bridging keeps programs from collapsing because checks arrive on Monday. It's not theft, it's arithmetic. It's also illegal if you file like it never happened and the audit isn't warned. He turned his head and gave me a look that had learned to intimidate numbers. We would have regularized it. The board is shy of reality. Voss wants his name sung without blemish. Driscoll wants process more than truth. Bly wants optics. Clara wants to be her mother. The singer, what is her name, wants opportunities. None of them wanted me in a bed. I'm expensive. You keep digitalis? I asked. He blinked. The hospital keeps it. I have a prescription for my arrhythmia. Tablets, they are at home. Why? Because your tea tasted different, I said. And because someone used a spoon to make one cup unlike the rest. If your tablets could become powder, someone had to know they existed. Everyone knows everything here, he said, bitter for the first time. Except what matters. Tablets don't crush into dust that hides in sugar. Digitalis kills clumsily. I would know if I'd taken enough to stop my own heart. And anyway, I didn't take it. I drank tea and listened to Hester talk about optics. If you want suspects, start there. Then ask Owen why he thinks deleting a copy deletes a crime. The nurse came then and scolded my presence with her eyes. I left Jasper glowering at a television that had decided weather was the only plot worth following. On the sidewalk, I called Wolfe with the headline, "No misfit jar." Driscoll bought footage. Bert remembers a hat and a blind spot. Jasper keeps tablets but not dust. Bridging is a loyalty test. Everyone is failing. Very good, Wolfe said. Return. When I walked into the office, the room had been reset to Wolfe's idea of a stage. Chairs angled in the semicircle that makes people believe they're not on display. The globe placed so it would catch a man's fidgeting hand. The orchid book open to a page Theodore doesn't like, so he'd come down to complain if our guests bored him. On the desk, beside the 5 spoons, Wolfe had set a 6th, a stainless imposter with a faint line at the bowl's edge. It was as close as he comes to props. You're going to bait them with a scar, I said. He shrugged a millimeter. I'm going to notice who recognizes it and how. Driscoll will recognize liability, I said. Bly will recognize shine. Voss will recognize donors. Kay will recognize herself, and Miss Wren will recognize the drawer, Wolfe said. Sit. We will ring them. He didn't invite. He commanded. He dictated the lines to me and listened to me deliver them because he knows my voice makes refusal sound expensive. To Driscoll. Mr. Wolfe requests your presence at 7. Mr. Millet has authorized him to review records. Your cooperation will save you the trouble of explaining resistance later. To Mrs. Bly. Mr. Wolfe has questions about an object you handled. Bringing your calendar will help you remember when you did so. To Gideon Voss. Your name will remain unsullied if you prefer it, Mr. Wolfe advises that the surest way to keep it so is to hear him at 7. To Mirabelle K. Your spoon will be returned to you at 7. Bring an honest account and save your repertoire. To Clara. 7. Bring your aunt's list of the silver and your patience. To Lila. 7. Bring nothing. Remember everything. When I hung up, Wolfe cracked the seal on a bottle of beer and looked at the foam as if it had an accent. Saul? Across from the trust, I said. Bert feeds him sins. Also, he has a man watching Driscoll's firm. If Tweed reappears, we'll see him first. Fritz looked in to ask how many cups to set, and Wolfe said, none. Then, because Fritz is not a suspect but a force of nature, he added, coffee for Mr. Voss, if he insists, tea for no one. They began arriving in the order you'd expect if you've ever seen people who think punctuality is strategy. Driscoll first, with a folder fat enough to look important and thin enough to be safe. He tried to hand me a letter asserting privilege. I used it to make a crooked stack straight. Mrs. Bly next, hat buoyant, smile professional, a notebook in her hand that had saved her from apology more than once. Gideon Voss came after with a watch the size of a moon and an apology for being early that could be heard on the stoop. Mirabelle Kay floated in exactly on time, scarf perfect, eyes taking the measure of the room the way a cat measures a ledge. Clara arrived with her shoulders set and her gloves off. Lila came last, quiet, as if she didn't want to crease the air. Wolfe didn't stand. He didn't need to. He inclined his head, a courtesy that in our house is the entire welcome, and gestured to the chairs. They arranged themselves as people do when they don't want to admit they've chosen sides. Driscoll near Clara, protective to the point of insolence. Mrs. Bly where the light would catch her best profile. Voss where he could see everyone and they could see him seeing. Kay within the reach of a table edge for her hands. Lila near the door, which can mean escape or service. "I've asked you here," Wolfe said, "because you share a circumstance that has developed a malignity. It is my job to release it without further harm. Your preferences will not impede me. Your cooperation will accelerate it." He let his eyes rest on each of them, indulgent and unkind. "No one will touch anything on this desk. We will talk first. Then I will arrange a demonstration." Driscoll's jaw folded politely. "Mr. Wolfe, before we begin, I must object to—" "You must not," Wolfe said. "You will have your time to preen." "Archie." I settled into my chair with my notebook where it had bitten men braver than Driscoll. Wolfe closed his eyes for a second, not to sleep, but to listen to the room thinking. When he opened them again, they were bright. "Miss Vardell," he said, and Clara sat up straighter. "You lent the past to the present, and the present betrayed you. Did you tell anyone besides Miss Wren that you intended to bring your spoons to me?" Clara swallowed. "I told Mr. Driscoll. He said it wasn't necessary." "Of course," Wolfe murmured. "Mr. Driscoll, we will return to you. Mrs. Bly, when you tidied the spoons with your cloth, what did you hope to erase?" "Unsightliness," she said promptly, then flushed as if she'd said a vulgarity in church. "Mr. Voss," Wolfe went on, "have you ever cared whether a balance sheet lies as long as the gala sings?" Voss boomed a laugh that died in the carpet. "I care that the house stands," he said, which is donor for yes. "Miss Kay," Wolfe said softly, "how many honey sticks can be used as pretext before a habit becomes a method?" She smiled without warmth. "I've never poisoned applause, Mr. Wolfe." "No," he said. "Only optics." He let silence settle, and when it had weight, he lifted the stainless impostor with 2 fingers and set it among the 5 sisters. The faint scratch on its bowl showed if you knew to look, and if you didn't, it waited. He didn't say a word. He only turned the spoons a fraction so the light ran along their throats and sat back and watched whose eyes arrived first. If you've never seen a room flinch with its eyes, you should try setting a trap with 6 teaspoons. Wolfe didn't say why he added the stainless ringer or why he'd drawn a faint line on its bowl with a pin. He just sat, hands folded, and let light travel the silver throats like a cue along a rail. People show you what they are when they think the moment is about objects. Clara looked first and looked away, the way you do when you see a ghost you own. Lila's eyes slid to the drawer in Wolfe's desk because she is a woman whose mind lives in furniture. Gideon Voss glanced at the spoons and checked his watch, which is his way of saying money doesn't wait. Mirabelle Kay didn't look at the set. She looked at me to see if I would look at her not looking. Driscoll looked at Wolfe, not at the spoons, which is how you watch a judge when you don't trust the law. And Hester Bly. She tried not to, but the stainless might as well have been a smudge on a camera lens. Her gaze snagged, left, came back, and held. Her fingers, resting on her notebook, traced an absent diagonal stroke. Good, Wolfe said mildly, as if the beer had been the right temperature. We will talk about optics, since they have been busy. Mrs. Bly, you handled the tray after Mr. Millais fell. You handled the spoons, and later you handled Miss Vardell's vestibule with a blank card. Why? She smiled the smile that had walked donors across 100 thin bridges. I tidied a scene, Mr. Wolfe. I'm in the business of rounding off hard corners. As for a vestibule, I put the florist's card on the corner of the desk with tweezers because sometimes theater deserves props. Our lab matched a partial print on that to one from your gala invitations. It's not a crime to post a note, I said, but it's unusual to bring a blank. She went still. If you've never seen composure change keys, watch a PR professional when the story shifts to the offstage. I came to apologize, she said. Miss Vardell was distressed. I didn't want to intrude. I realized a note would be misconstrued. I left it blank. It was foolish, not sinister. Foolishness can be both, Wolfe said. You also polished spoons. You used a microfiber cloth with a stitched edge and lemon-scented cleaner. You polished with straight strokes that ignore fluting. One of these sisters bears those strokes. Why? To make them uniform, she said. To make the room decent again. She colored, hearing the word. I wasn't destroying anything. You were destroying difference, Wolfe said, not unkindly. That is your métier. Mr. Driscoll, he sat forward, the folder's edge making a neat border on his knee. My métier, he said smoothly, is to keep an institution functioning. And I object to the implication that You object too soon, Wolfe said. You bought corridor footage from your guard, asked him to hold backups, and hired a man to tail Mr. Goodwin. You also suggested to Miss Vardell that she not consult me. When she did, you entered her office in the blind spot of your cameras. Did you retrieve a key from her bag? Did you open her drawer and examine the spoons she intended to bring me? He did well. He didn't. Blink. He let the outrage bloom, then trimmed it. I retrieved nothing. I asked Bert to preserve footage in case of a legal claim. I asked Miss Vardell to avoid theatrics. I did not enter her drawer. You can accuse Mr. Wolfe, but you cannot invent. We never invent, I said. We collect. Bert watched you buy the copy. Your firm billed you last year for a donor matter. Your tweed lost me at a mailbox, but not Saul Panzer. As for the drawer, someone opened it, retied the tissue, and left polish marks that do not belong to Miss Vardell's aunt or to a man who has ever polished silver. If not you, Mrs. Bly, if not Mrs. Bly, who? Mirabelle finally let her attention touch the desk. She looked at the stainless as if she might hear its pitch. You want me to react? She said. No, I'm not your optic. You're my habit, Wolfe said. You fold rims. You left the hospital with a cup and a spoon and brought the spoon home where it sits by your sink with Clara Vardell's crest at its throat. That is theft. It may also be concealment. Or housewarming, she said. You can ask Carlo. He told me to take a misfit. There are no misfits, I told her. I took inventory with a man who loves stainless the way patriots love flags. Then he's wrong, she said, smiling with just her eyes now. Or I am. If you wish to accuse me of tidying a cup after a visit, accuse me. But I didn't poison Jasper Millais. He pays for tickets when no one else does. Magnanimity isn't an alibi, I said. Clara's hands, bare at last, were pleated into themselves. She had been quiet too long for her own comfort. Mr. Wolfe, she said, what do you want from me? Attention, he said, and patience. He opened his eyes fully. When he does that in a room, it tidies itself. Mr. Millais' collapse required premeditation. Digitalis is clumsy. Whoever used it had to choose a means that would target him alone and then eliminate the sign of targeting. The means was the spoon. Miss Vardell chose which went to him. Unwittingly, we assume. After the collapse, Mrs. Bligh, mindful of optics, wiped the spoons. Later, after Miss Vardell told Mr. Driscoll she intended to bring them to me, someone opened her drawer and polished one of the 5 again to make them more alike. Meanwhile, the spoon with the hairline, a distinct piece, vanished. He set a finger on the stainless. He didn't touch it. He touched the air above it. This is not it. But it looks like it if you count only optics. The person who can't bear an anomaly looks here first. The person who knows silver looks elsewhere. The person who remembers the weight of a stolen thing looks nowhere and bites her lip to stop her eyes from betraying her. Mirabel's lip obeyed. Her throat worked once. Hester Bligh's hand fluttered toward the cloth in her bag and then stopped, guilty of its profession. Driscoll's jaw flexed at "opened her." Drawer Voss said, "Well," on a breath and tried to sound jovial. Wolfe let that settle. Then he crooked a finger. "Miss Wren," she started, almost knocking her notebook. "Yes?" "You poured the tea," he said. "You placed the spoon in Mr. Millay's saucer. After he fell and the tray was disturbed, you did not touch it again. When Miss Vardell went to the hospital, you remained in her office and saw who came and went. Who did you see enter when she was gone?" Lila swallowed and cut her eyes. Not toward Driscoll, which would have been noble, but toward Mrs. Bligh, which was honest. "Mrs. Bligh," she said quietly. "She came to check optics." She picked up Miss Vardell's bag, then put it down, then asked whether she could sit. She sat. When she left, the drawer was locked, but the string on the tissue had been tied with a bow. "Clara ties knots." "Thank you," Wolfe said. Hester's mouth opened. "Miss Bligh?" She made a brave, foolish try at turning that into a virtue. "I wanted to be sure the silver was secure. Reporters invent when objects wander. You invent when they don't," I said. Driscoll moved in then, fast. "Enough. This is grotesque. Mr. Wolfe, you're smearing a reputation on insinuation. If you have evidence—" "I have you," Wolfe said calmly. "You hired a watcher, you bought footage, you asked a guard to hold a backup he could not hold, purely to control narratives. You entered Miss Vardell's office after hours. If you did not touch the drawer, you enabled the one who did. As for evidence, Mrs. Bligh's print on my mat says she trespassed. The cloth from her bin says she tidied. The scratches on one spoon say she learned in a hurry, and Miss Kay's spoon says our missing sister has not returned to its set." He looked at Mirabel, as if she were a sequence he could recite. "If you did not steal it, you will produce the hospital spoon and accept the apology you will not receive." Her eyes flashed. "You can't." "I can, and I will," Wolfe said. "Presently." He leaned back, and the chair acknowledged the change in weather. "But first a demonstration. Mrs. Bligh, you have polished thousands of surfaces. Choose for me, please, the spoon that offends your eye most. Do not touch." He tipped the desk lamp a quarter-inch, so the artificial sun ran along the line he had drawn. "Choose with optics." She hated that. She did it anyway. "That one," she said, and pointed to the stainless with the fake scar. Wolfe's lids lowered, pleased and weary at once. "Of course," he murmured. "Now, Mr. Voss, or you will choose the impostor by its sound." "Archie, oblige." I took 2 spoons delicately at their throats and tapped each lightly against the edge of the blotter. Sterling sings stainless answers. The room heard it. Even donors do. Voss's brows went up. He said, chastened. "Not that one." "Not that one," Wolfe agreed. He turned his head, at last, to Mirabel Kay, and when he spoke her name, it was soft as an aria's first breath. "Miss Kay." She wet her lower lip. "Yes." "You will tell me where you disposed of the spoon that shivered in silence," he said, "and whether you acted because Mrs. Bligh asked you to make Jasper Millay's cup different, Or because Mr. Driscoll made you believe the trust's survival required it? He lifted a hand to quell the eruption he knew was coming. No one speaks. You all will have your turn. Miss Kay, this is yours. She held herself very still, and for the first time that day, her eyes were not a performance. They were a woman's eyes measuring a choice. The room waited, and the spoons on Wolfe's desk were the only things that didn't tremble. Mirabelle didn't blink, but her voice arrived 2 notes lower. I threw it away, she said. Not here. Not at the hospital. On the way back from the florist, there's a storm grate on Kester and 12th. I dropped it there and listened for the sound. It didn't sing. It clanged. I hated that Clara made a sound I hadn't heard from her, small and raw. Hester's hat lifted a fraction, like a ship in a swell. Driscoll didn't move. Wolfe nodded once as if the room had kept time. Why? He asked. Because Mr. Driscoll told me to, she said, looking at him, not away. He caught me in the corridor when the medics left. He said optics were terrible and the room looked like carelessness. He said if donors saw tarnish and tea stains and an heirloom with a crack, they would make a story and the story would kill the trust. He said, take the ugly one away. We'll replace it. Do it quietly. I thought he meant a favor for Clara. I thought he meant polish, she swallowed. He didn't mean polish. And before that, Wolfe said, who told you to ask for honey? She glanced at the ceiling as if a prompter lived there. No one, she said. Then, after the breath you take when the truth comes for you, Owen. In the hall, before the tea began, he said the room needed a beat to relax people, that if I stepped out and came back it would give everyone a moment to settle. He said ask Carlo for honey. It would be natural. I thought he was doing stage management. He's very good at sounding reasonable. Clara's chair creaked. Owen, she said, like a person trying a foreign word. You told me not to be theatrical. He didn't answer her. He looked at Wolfe. She's inventing. You've cornered her. She'll say anything to get out from under your cross, Wolfe said, mildly bored. Miss Kay, did you see him approach the sideboard when Mr. Fiore went for honey? Mirabelle's eyes closed, then opened, the way you do when the note is high and your throat must trust you. Yes, she said. He picked up a spoon, looked at the bowl and put it down. Then he picked up another and touched the throat with his thumb. It was quick. Lila was bent over the pot, finding cups. I thought... She stopped. You thought what? I said. I thought it was fussy, she said. I thought lawyers are like that. They correct a place setting to feel in charge. I didn't see powder. I didn't see a bottle. I saw his thumb and his attention. And later Jasper went grey and I remembered the word digitalist from a music friend's mother and I thought, oh. And then Owen told me to take the cracked one away and I knew he had noticed the crack too. Wolfe inclined his head toward Lila without looking. Miss Wren? Lila had her hands folded so tight they were almost one object. He did go to the sideboard, she said, voice steady because it had decided to be. He said, let me help, and he brushed crumbs into his palm. I didn't see anything else. I was watching the pot. Mr. Voss wanted lemon, Mrs. Bly wanted milk not to splash. I didn't see anything else. Wolfe opened his eyes fully on Driscoll. It wasn't anger, it was curiosity that had finished its work. You had motive. Mr. Millet told Miss Wren to save originals. He could hurt you. You had method. You created a 30-second window and used the most natural instrument to favor one cup. You had means. Mr. Millet has a prescription. Counsel often knows a colleague's afflictions. Digitalis is crude. You hoped for distress, not death. Afterward, you moved to control the evidence. You sent Miss Kay to remove the distinctive spoon. You polished difference with Mrs. Bly. You bought corridor footage. You tried my latch. You are not a poisoner by temperament. You are a coward by habit. You believed necessity excused sloppiness. Driscoll's jaw flexed. He went for hauteur and got heat. You're theatrical. You have no proof. You have a singer's vanity and a girl's resentment. You have a PR woman's cloth and an old man's prejudice against lawyers. If you think, pfui, Wolfe said. Archie. I stood, moved to the desk, and took up the stainless ringer. It was the only thing in the room that didn't mind being picked up. 2 minutiae, I said. First, the residue from Fritz's salt cellar. It's not salt, it's lactulose powder. A hospital osmotic. Harmless. Someone wanted to see whether we'd sniff a powder and whether it would draw a reaction. Someone with a taste for rehearsal, but without chemistry. Second, the cellophane on our latch. The man who trailed me works for a firm Driscoll hires. He lost me at a mailbox. Last night he was with Driscoll. Then Driscoll went and bought footage and asked the guard to hold. That's not proof in a courtroom, it's proof in this room. Hester rallied one more time. Mr. Wolfe, even if any of that were true, which it is not, you cannot punish a motive, you cannot chart an intention. You have a cloud of accusations and your print on my mat, Wolfe said. Do not forget your vanity. Voss cleared his throat in a way that tried to sound judicial. If any of this is accurate, it is deplorable. But you must sit, Wolfe said, not looking at him. He addressed Mirabelle with the kind of pity he saves for people who do the wrong thing with grace. Miss Kay, you did not poison Mr. Millet. You abetted the concealment of a tool because a man told you a story about optics and survival that flattered you. If you return the spoon you stole from the hospital and sign a statement of what you saw and did, you may salvage your future. Otherwise, you will trade it for a career in apologies. Her breath came out on a note you could have tuned to. I'll sign, she said. Her eyes flicked to the sink in her mind where a silver V had been a liar. I'll bring the hospital spoon now. The other is gone. Good, Wolfe said. Mrs. Bly, you will deliver the cloth and any cleaner you used, and you will sign that you altered the surface of the spoons after Mr. Millet fell, and again after Miss Vardell confided her intention to bring the set to me. You will abandon the word optics for a month as penance. Mr. Voss, you will call your accountant and instruct him to prepare for an audit that does not flinch. Miss Vardell, you will stop lending the past. Miss Wren, you will stop revising the present. Mr. Driscoll, he let the name sit on the desk between them, heavy and soft. You will call your firm and ask for counsel other than yourself. Then you will call Mr. Kramer and invite him to my house. If you decline, I will invite him for you and add what you told Miss Kay in the hall and what you did at the sideboard when Mr. Fiore obligingly left the room, and I will send Mr. Kramer to your guard. Driscoll's mouth tried 3 shapes and chose none. His eyes went to Clara then, and he made his mistake. He said her name as if it belonged to him. Clara, we need to... Stop, she said, calm as a pin. Don't say optics. He didn't. He looked at Wolfe instead, which is worse. For a man who lives on words, he had none that mattered. You can scream privilege, I offered him, but Kramer won't hear it through the chain on the door. He likes this carpet, Archie, Wolfe murmured, rebuke and amusement in equal measure. Voss, to his credit, got the idea that bluster was not the tonic of the day. He put his watch away. Hester's hand, which had been fluttering, came down and stayed. Lila breathed like a person who hadn't in an hour. Mirabelle touched her throat and didn't sing. Wolfe pressed a button on the intercom that connects to Fritz because it pleases him to use it as if it summons fate. Fritz, he said, coffee for Mr. Voss. None for anyone else. When the coffee arrived, no one reached for it. I dialed Kramer and told him we had a man who had used a spoon for the wrong purpose and a room full of people who could tell him the tempo. He said some things about my mother and his breakfast plans, and then told me he was on his way because he knows Wolfe doesn't tease him unless dessert is involved. While we waited, Wolfe let the silence work. It did. Driscoll's folders sagged. Hester's hat learned humility. Mirabelle's eyes stopped performing and settled on shame. Clara sat very still and sounded like a woman counting a past she could no longer afford. Lila, who notices everything, watched the light on the spoons and kept her hands to herself. Kramer arrived with the air of a man who has lent patience to too many people. He scowled at everyone, scowled at me for decoration, and scowled at the set on the desk as if it had taken a bite out of a lieutenant he liked. Wolfe gave him the short version, which for Wolfe is a miracle. Motive, method, manipulations, in a paragraph that would have made a stenographer weep. Kramer listened without interrupting more than twice, then turned to Driscoll and asked if he wanted to do this tonight or in the morning. In the morning, Driscoll said, because he couldn't help himself. With counsel. Tonight, Kramer said, because he could. With handcuffs. When they'd gone, the room exhaled. Wolfe looked at the spoons without touching them. There is an indecency, he said almost to himself, in people who polish the world instead of cleaning it. Good line, I told him. Want me to write it down for when Voss funds a plaque? He shut his eyes, which is how he smiles when he isn't wasting mouth. No, he said. Fritz will serve dinner, and Archie, tell Miss Vardell that she may call the Trust's insurance tomorrow. As for Miss Kay, arrange a messenger for her statement and the hospital spoon. She may return to her music if she can stand hearing herself. He leaned back. The chair admitted it had done a day's work. The spoons on the blotter didn't tremble. Outside, a siren went by, unimpressed by ethics. Inside, Fritz announced something with saffron. I wrote up the notes while Wolfe pretended to nap. If you want a moral, take his. There's a difference between shine and clean. In this town, it's the only one that matters. The brownstone had its quiet back, but it wasn't the usual quiet. This one had the weight of aftershocks. Fritz set the table as if nothing in the world had tried to tilt a teacup. Wolfe was in his chair, eyes closed, hands on his belly, the posture of a man preparing to let digestion and deduction coexist. I was at my desk, making sure the record of the case stayed sharp enough for history and dull enough for lawyers. Kramer had taken Driscoll, and he'd taken Mrs. Bly's cloth for good measure. Mirabelle Kay had signed her statement, promised to return the hospital spoon, and left with eyes that were older than her songs. Clara had walked out stiff-backed, no gloves, no illusions. Lila had gone with her, steady as a file clerk who had finally decided her eyes were worth more than someone else's orders. Voss left booming about audits and donors, but the sound had a hollow to it. The spoons, 5 sterling and 1 stainless, remained on Wolfe's blotter, catching the lamplight as if nothing had ever stained them. "You'll keep them?" I asked. "Temporarily," Wolfe murmured. "Miss Vardell may reclaim them when she decides she will not use them again. They are her inheritance, but also her lesson. I will not curate her memory for her, I let that sit. You ever going to explain why you took the case? At the start, you didn't blink at a stolen spoon." His eyes opened the way doors open when a house admits it has guests. "A spoon is trifling," he said. "Proof is not. When a woman tells me she has only proof, I listen. Proof is oxygen. Without it, people improvise with polish and optics, and then lives are threatened or reputations ruined, or both. I prefer to breathe." It was a sermon, and I didn't interrupt. Dinner was lamb with rosemary left over from Wolfe's thoughts the night before, and a salad so precise even the lettuce looked proud. He chewed in silence, then added, "Mr. Driscoll will protest. He will claim he did not administer the dose, that Miss Kay's eyes betrayed her, that Mrs. Bly's cloth blurred distinctions. he will hope the law requires perfection. It does not. It requires plausibility, and I have arranged that for Mr. Kramer. Millet's still alive, I said. He's not thanking anyone for it, but he's alive. Life is not gratitude, Wolfe replied. It is persistence. Mr. Millet will persist. So will the trust in diminished form. Perhaps Miss Vardell will persist as well. He wiped his lips with deliberation. The spoon that shivered is gone. It served its purpose. What remains is the silence. He leaned back, let his eyes close again, and declared the matter ended, which, in Wolfe's house, is the final verdict. I wrote it up later with my usual flair and considered how a cracked silver spoon had nearly become a funeral. If you ask me, the morale was simple enough. When you start polishing truth to make it shine, sooner or later it breaks in your hands. The brownstone was quiet again, the right kind this time. Dinner was finished, the case was finished, and Wolfe, predictably, was not. He lifted his glass of beer and muttered, "There is no greater vanity than concealment." I said, "Except maybe singing when you can't hit the note," and left him to it, 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 and left him to it,